The briefing today will have on a new piece of research entitled The Supply Chain Ripple Effect, How COVID-19 is Affecting Garment Workers and Factories in the Asia and the Pacific. The research was undertaken by a team comprising the ILO's Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit based in Bangkok, Better Work, which is a collaboration between the ILO and the International Finance Corporation, which works to improve working conditions, labor rights, and competitiveness in the garment industry. The ILO Sweden Decent Work for Garment Supply Chains in Asia project, and Cornell University's ILR School. Okay, we'll have three speakers with us today. Can I just introduce them briefly? It's Christian Viegelahn, who is the Senior Economist for the ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, who is joining us from Bangkok. We have Arianna Rossi, who is the Senior Research and Policy Specialist for Better Work, who's joining us from Geneva. And also in Geneva, we have Tara Rangarajan, Head of Communications, Buyer Engagement and the Americas, also from Better Work. If you need the spellings of those names, please take a look on the media advisory. They're all there. Following the speakers, we'll have a Q&A session. Just if I can ask if anyone here has put their name into Zoom, it was great if we can see who you are and what organization you're representing. If it will help a lot when it comes to the Q&A. We have both a press release and the research brief available. I hope you already have those. Please note that the embargo on those is 4 p.m. Thailand time, so an hour from now. For your information, all microphones are muted centrally, and so if it comes to the question and answers, if you're called to speak, we will unmute that for you. Okay, so let's get underway, and I will pass the floor to Christian Viegelahn. Christian, over to you. Christian, over to you. Do you hear us?
Yes, now I hear you. Sorry, I just got shortly dropped out of the Zoom, but can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. So good afternoon from Bangkok. So the brief that you all likely have in front of you is based on extensive desk research and draws upon a wide range of sources of information. So that includes reports, interview with some leading stakeholders from across the sector in Asia, as well as publicly available data. So what are our main findings? Well, the COVID crisis has hit and continues to hit the garment sector particularly hard, affecting thousands of enterprises and millions of workers. So the garment sector is one of the key sectors in this region. It employs an estimated 65 million workers in Asia and the Pacific. And actually, this is 3 out of 4 garment workers worldwide are actually based in this region. So how has COVID impacted the garment sector? So there were basically 3 channels. One is the drop in global consumer demand for garments. So in most countries, actually consumer demand continues to remain considerably below pre-crisis levels. And this, of course, also affects the garment sector. 2, there were mandatory workplace closures imposed. So in most of the garment exporting countries in the region, factories had to close down for at least some weeks back in March and April. But I mean, even up to now, there is a risk that this can happen if public authorities decide that this is the right step to take to curb the spread of the virus. And 3, there was some disruption to the supply of inputs and raw materials, leading to production stoppages and delays. And this also continues to be a risk that this can happen again. Of course, the situation is very fluid. So the situation can and is quickly changing over time. But what do we know about the impact of the crisis so far? Well, global garment trade has virtually collapsed in the first half of 2020. So in some cases, imports of major buying countries from Asia's main exporting countries dropped on a monthly basis by as much as 70% compared to the year before. Cancellations and reductions of buyers' orders were common. So thousands of factories closed, at least temporarily, and some of them indefinitely, Worker layoffs and dismissals were widespread. Factories that have since reopened also saw some reductions in their workforce capacity. So the exact impact, of course, varies country by country, but based on the data that we have for those countries where we have some information, we calculate that a typical garment worker lost out on at least 2 to 4 weeks of work and in many cases income. And in factories that did reopen, only 3 in 5 workers were called back to the factory. So declines in earnings and delays in wage payments were common as well. One thing that I would highlight is that the garment sector employs many women. So 35 million garment workers in Asia and the Pacific are women. So this is the majority. And obviously the fact that the garment sector has been hit so hard is disproportionately affecting women. So there is a significant risk that we see that existing inequalities between women and men will be exacerbated, and some of the progress achieved over recent years will actually be reversed. Protecting workers from COVID and putting in place appropriate occupational safety and health measures at the workplace is, of course, key for economies to recover. And the ILO in recent months put out extensive guidance on how to do that. And although many factories took steps towards minimizing the risk of COVID infection, there is some evidence that in some cases, occupational safety and health measures have been implemented rather inconsistently. The garment sector in some countries continues to be marked by low levels of collective bargaining and significant restrictions on freedom of association. In some cases, lockdown measures have reportedly limited union activity. So we at the ILO think that social dialogue between governments and
we seem to have lost Christian for a few moments. Christian, can you hear us? Christian, can you hear us? I think as we've lost Christian, let's move to Arianna. Arianna, can you take it on? Thanks.
Yes, that's fine. And actually, I'm just going to finish the last thought that Christian wanted to express, which is really central to the ILO. That is dialogue between governments and worker and employers organizations is, of course, key as an instrument to respond to the crisis. So, in fact, in the face of this unprecedented crisis, the government responses across the region have followed broadly similar patterns, covering industry shutdowns, worker income support, employment protection, worker leave, and industry subsidies. And it is, of course, a bit too early to really establish their long-term effectiveness and impact. But it is really critical for governments to keep the momentum going to respond to the crisis. And to this end, international solidarity and support will be really critical because, of course, especially for those lower income countries in the region that have limited fiscal space and modest social protection schemes to compensate for job-related income losses. As I was just mentioning, social dialogue is key to finding solutions in response to the crisis, and evidence from this research shows that social dialogue has been effective, but only in those locations and situations where existing social dialogue structures and initiatives were already in place. And this links back to the ILO's COVID-19 policy framework, which is articulated over 4 pillars: stimulating the economy and employment, and supporting enterprises, jobs and incomes, protecting workers at the workplace, and finally relying on social dialogue for solutions. And the ILO has been very active in facilitating dialogue in the industry, both at the national and global levels, and also in supporting enterprises and workers with practical guides and tools, including through the Better Work program. In terms of looking ahead, this research starts to sketch out the possible way forward for the global garment industry and its implications for Asia and the Pacific. And we intend to take up this research even more in a second phase, where we will look at future scenarios and the structural reforms that will be needed to build back better. And indeed, the full speed and shape of the industry's recovery are likely not to be seen until next year or even 2022. So it's clear, though, also from interviews, that there is a very strong momentum to take this major disruption to the industry and turn it into a way of challenging the status quo, and really strive for an industry that is more resilient, more sustainable, more inclusive, and more equitable. And this reconfiguration of the industry will likely build on and accelerate existing trends in the industry, such as technological innovation and changing geographies of production, and should also take into account the existing constraints to competitiveness in the region, such as access to reliable power sources and education and skills. We see that really the way to achieve a more sustainable reconfiguration of the industry is through collective solutions that put people and planet at the core in what the ILO calls the human-centered future of work. So on that note, I will pass the virtual floor to our colleague Tara Rangarajan, who is going to talk about the call to action in the global garment industry. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Arianna and Christian, for those remarks and overview. I'm just going to go for a minute to give you a very practical example of what it means for the industry to come together on a collective response. When COVID really started to take hold on the global stage in March and April, the actors from across the supply chain came together and determined that in order to really address the urgent crisis as well as the longer term needs of the sector, it was essential to come together for a shared vision and set of commitments. So together, the ILO helped to facilitate a process led by the International Confederation of Trade Unions and the International Organization of Employers, which are the largest bodies representing unions and employers in the sector, to write what's called a call to action. It's a shared set of commitments that's now endorsed by over 130 endorsees, ranging from brands to manufacturers to unions to NGOs, multi-stakeholder initiatives, to all get behind a shared set of goals that really look at how to bring an immediate financing to the sector to ensure business resilience, to ensure the ongoing payment of workers' wages, and to look at the longer term needs in terms of strengthening social protection systems for the long term. And this allows for fiscal stimulus coming from governments as well as international donors, and also opens the space for brands to help support their direct suppliers if the circumstances allow for that. These commitments are at a global level, but they're being implemented in 8 initial priority countries, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Haiti, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Myanmar. And really underscoring the work in each one of the countries, as well as at the global level, is social dialogue. So all of the partners coming together at the global level or at the national level to agree on a shared set of priorities for moving the industry forward. So with that, I'm going to stop and pass it back to Steve, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Tara, and the other speakers. Okay, it's Q&A session now. If anyone would like to ask a question, we need you to virtually raise your hand. At the bottom of your screen, you should see the participants button. If you click that, you should open a panel there on the right-hand side with a raise hand button. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. Excuse us if we jump around the order a little bit. We're trying to include as many people from as many places and as many countries and organizations. If you ask a question, please identify yourself as well when you ask the questions. We're really grateful if you could keep the questions as short and clear as possible. Okay, let's kick off. I have Sam Reeves from AFP. My colleagues will unmute you, and as soon as you're unmuted, Sam, it's over to you.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thanks for the very interesting report. I don't read through it. I get the impression it's probably quite hard to work this out because it's changing all the time. But of the 10 countries you looked at, can you give an overall estimate of how many jobs have been lost right across the garment sector in Asia, or is that too kind of complex?
Yeah, I can try to answer that one, even though I'm not sure that I can give you the information that you would, I guess, all ideally like to have, because indeed, like the information that we have is pretty patchy. Like I mean, we see reports from this and that country, but then like it's really difficult also to assess to what extent these numbers can be compared. Then some layoffs that about which we get informed, like they might only be temporary, others might be rather permanent. So it is really difficult in that sense, like to come to an overall estimate, like this crisis has so far created X million job losses. I mean, I don't think that we are in a position to do that, unfortunately. But also, I mean, the longer the longer this crisis lasts, I think also the more information potentially becomes available. So, I mean, certainly we are following the developments, but yeah, I mean, as you also said, it's changing very fast, and it's really difficult to take stock of what is happening. It's really difficult.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Thanks for that. Okay, I'd like to now ask Ovi over there in Bangladesh from the Dhaka Tribune. As soon as you're unmuted, please ask your question, Ovi.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Ovi.
This is Ovi from Bangladesh. I work for the Daily Dhaka Tribune. My question is here is findings from Better Work Bangladesh. You mentioned in the report that 230,000 workers among the ILO Better Work factories were still not working as factories reopened, while representing 41% of total workers under the Better Work program. So my question is here, is the worker laid off or did they lost their job? How can we clarify the number? And another issue is, here is some issue about Bangladesh, like 34% experience order cancellations and 38% factories faced order reductions. So do you have any information about the latest update of the work order cancelled or restored? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. So indeed, it's a bit similar to the response that Christian just gave. This finding from Better Work Bangladesh is based on a survey that was carried out in the spring, and that was really meant to be a very quick assessment of the situation at the time. And the way that it was formulated was asking workers whether they were working or not at that particular time. So similar to Christian said, we were not able to really assess whether they were not working on a permanent basis or whether they were on the official holiday that was mandated at the time, or whether they are on a temporary leave. And that is why we have characterized it as such in the brief as well, just as workers currently not working or not returning to work. And similarly, the way that managers responded to the survey did not allow for a further identification of their relationship with the brands in terms of the order and the volume of orders. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Arianna. Okay, let me now turn the floor to Eric San Juan from Agence FA. Eric, when you're off mute, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead, Eric.
Yes, you can hear me? Okay. Yes,
Yep.
I'm Eric San Juan from Agencia FE from Spain. I would like to know if you have any clues whether this crisis will bring long-term effects in the way both local factories work in Asia and for production brands who are in other countries and produce in Asia.
Yeah, on that one. Yeah, so first of all, thanks a lot for this question. I mean, like this crisis is so deep that it's, I think, quite difficult to imagine that this would not lead like to some longer term changes as well. But then I think it's really open, in what direction we would go, because also, I mean, we have COVID, but then we also have technological change, which can open up also some opportunities for garment producers. And then I think the real question is, I mean, are some of the challenges going to be tackled? And here I'm talking about, for example, a non-reliable power supply, also upgrade of lacking of appropriate transport and communication infrastructure. I'm also talking about making the industry greener. So I mean, all these things I think are on the table, and they are, I think, very much also. I mean, there are some discussions about this, and I think it's just. At this stage, I think it's really too early to say in what direction the industry would go. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Let me now turn to Mohammed Rafayette Ullah, I believe the name. Mohammed, when you're off mute, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nidham. After many days later, we are talking. I have already put my question in the chat box. You can see. Still, I am again asking this question to you and other panelists. How many workers so far have lost their job in the garment sector in Bangladesh due to fallout of COVID? And how many workers may lose their job in the garment sector in Bangladesh in next 6 months? And what are the outlooks if the second wave affect the supply chain? What would be the effect in garment sector in Bangladesh if the second wave comes again? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you also for this question. So yeah, I mean, as you yourself are describing it, I mean, the situation is very fluid, and of course, I mean, we are also observing what is happening in many countries in the world, Europe, US, and other countries as well. If we look at the data, the latest data, for example, on retail sales, which includes sales of garments, that is available to us, then like even in July or August, the retail sales globally and in most countries was not really back to pre-crisis levels. In fact, it was quite far away from that. And given that the situation is worsening, I think, I mean, we can all imagine what that could mean. And of course, this is also expected to affect the garment sector. Again, I mean, I think it's really difficult really to put precise numbers on it, since the situation is so quickly changing. And then it's sometimes difficult as well in the data that we are using and the information that we have to kind of identify, like who was kind of permanently laid off or who was perhaps just sent on temporary leave or so. So that's why it's really difficult to kind of pin that down to one number. So yeah, I apologize, but yeah, I hope that there's some understanding for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Matt Blomberg from Thomson Reuters. As soon as you're off mute, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Matt. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, the report and the speakers have talked about 40% of workers weren't called back to the factory as of the beginning of the start of the third quarter. Is there any indication how that might have changed since then? I mean, we're three months further down the track, and do you anticipate that the industry in these countries that you've studied here will return to the capacity that it was running at before the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. So on your second question, so I mean, yeah, I mean, we all don't know really how long this COVID crisis will last. And then, I mean, we all hopefully, we all hope that at a certain point this will be over. And then, of course, once this is over, I don't think that there's a reason to assume that, yeah, I mean, the garment industry would not recover. Yeah, but again, I mean, I think it's really, really difficult to make some predictions in that respect. And then on your first question, so I mean, as you rightly pointed out, yeah, as of beginning of third quarter, actually, we saw that, I mean, for those countries for which we had some data, we saw that, I mean, varying by country, that factories were only back to like 40, 60, or maximum 80% of workforce capacity. So this was on the reports that we could use so far. So what has happened in the last 3 months, I mean, that's obviously always a problem because there's a little bit of a delay in getting the most recent data. But I mean, based on let's say kind of a general feeling that I would have, and following the news, and also based on the fact that retail sales indeed have not recovered, I mean, I would be pretty surprised that I mean, as we speak now, that all factories are back to 100% capacity. So I mean, I don't really think that this is realistic to assume. But I mean, the exact number we don't know. We will know probably in another 2 to 3 months. So I mean, of course, we are following this. Thank you very much.
Maybe I'll just add a couple of words to that in terms of whether or not the industry will return. And I think what's important to also consider is ensuring that when the industry returns, as it continues to grow back, that it does so in a way that is a stronger, better, and more resilient apparel supply chain. And the crisis that hit and continues to impact businesses and workers across Asia and the wider global supply chains have revealed the vulnerability and weaknesses of a supply chain that can crash so easily, with workers having no social safety net in most producing countries to fall back on, weeks, if not months, without wages, and businesses really struggling to be able to keep their doors open. So, what's incumbent upon all of the actors in the supply chain, whether it's brands, whether it's manufacturers, governments, and workers' organizations, is to look at how we engage in social dialogue, how we build a better and more resilient supply chain that's going to ensure a greater ability to respond to this type of shock in the future.
Okay, thanks, Tara. Rayad Hossain from the Daily Ittifaq, over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Rayad.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, ILO, for the report. But we could not find any concrete figure regarding factory closure or jobless or retrenchment of workers in Bangladesh perspective. So, have you any? Would you please clarify regarding this issue, and have you any plan further survey regarding this issue? Thank you.
Christian, do you want to take that one on about the about figures on closures and job losses in Bangladesh?
Yeah, I mean, on Bangladesh, I do think that we have a couple of figures, but yeah, so basically, I mean, that's what I think Arianna mentioned before. So that was like about people not returning to work when factories reopened. I think so. So basically, we don't have any more figures than that. So I mean, if we had those figures, for sure, we would have included them into the report. Thanks.
If I can just add quickly on the follow-up research, because indeed, I mean, as it is a very fluid situation, we have very much the intention of continuing studying it, and also we are exploring options to also continue doing factory level surveys with managers and workers. So this is really meant to be the first step into exploring this very fundamental question for the industry in the region, but it's by no means the last. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Muni at the Financial Express in Bangladesh, do you want to ask your question, please?
Hello, everyone. This is Monira from Financial Express. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Muni.
Okay. You mentioned how many factories are under Bangladesh Better Work program, and the number the report mentioned 230,749 workers did not rejoin. So what is the number of the factories of these workers, and out of what total workers? If we get this number, it would helpful to compare. And another question, what is the benefit of the cash announcement announced by the development partners like EU, World Bank, and ADB, if such supports are not received in the most crisis moment? Because you know, the announcement were made in April and this is now in October. Whether ILO can play any role in speedy disbursements of this incentive? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those questions. So Better Work Bangladesh at the moment covers 260 factories, employing 700,000 workers. So this is the figure for the program at the moment that you can also find on betterwork.org in case you want any follow-up information there. I think when it comes to the role of the ILO in facilitating the disbursement of funds, the ILO is of course meant to support the process, and especially through facilitating dialogue. So it's really the role as a convener and ensuring that the government is continuing the commitment that has set out at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, and ensuring that workers and employers organizations have a way of participating in the decision-making process. So that's really the role of the ILO when it comes to that issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matt at Thomson Reuters, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I say I'm a garment worker who's lost their job in the pandemic. What are the prospects of me getting back into the industry? I mean, I guess a lot of people have had to go and look for other work, but what, in you guys' opinion, what are the prospects of me getting back into the industry? You know, is there a timeline? And also, should I expect to be being employed in similar conditions that I was employed in previously, in terms of you know, salary and different benefits and the conditions in the factory?
Yeah, I can try to answer that one. Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. You know, I think in large part, most of the workers who are in the apparel sector, it's their first formal job. And so, you know, it takes a pretty basic level of skills to be able to enter the apparel industry, which meaning that the barrier to entry is relatively low for workers who lose their jobs to be able to find other jobs if those jobs materialize. What we get concerned about is workers falling out of the formal sector into the informal economy, into precarious work. And that's why it's so important to have social security, social protection systems in countries to protect workers and to enable them to earn income when they may be between jobs. The ILO also has, very vibrant skills development programs in many of the countries around the world that will help to provide workers with upskilling, in particular as automation and digitalization hits the apparel sector, to ensure that women in particular are not left behind as the apparel sector modernizes and they have the skills needed in order to continue to compete in the job market. In terms of whether the conditions will improve, this is an opportunity to ensure that conditions do improve. I think this is a global spotlight has been put on the apparel industry, showing just how vulnerable it is. And it's an opportunity for consumers around the world and for the public at large to demand that the working conditions do not worsen, but very much to the opposite, as an opportunity to say we demand better, and businesses and workers need to be able to operate under a business model that will protect working conditions and improve and strengthen their enforcement.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sam Reeves at AFP, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so just a very boring factual question. In the press release and the report, you say the Asia Pacific employs an estimated 65 million garment sector workers in 2019. Is that the whole Asia Pacific, or is that the 10 countries that you surveyed?
Yeah, I can take that one. So that's actually the whole Asia and the Pacific. So, and this number is based essentially on the available data, because I mean, many countries run their labor force surveys. So we got those numbers from there. And for those countries for which we don't have any information, so these are estimates using essentially, yeah, I mean, we have like a set of models to predict those numbers, yeah, based on economic
That's very helpful, thank you.
Conditions, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, Matt Thompson-Rogers, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just following back with Tara, yeah, I understand that, this is a good opportunity for everyone to kind of take stock and try and impose that the industry has better conditions. But given that there's now, an oversupply of labor, I mean, in Cambodia, where I am, we're already seeing that people will go back to work for less pay with worse conditions because of the situation. So, I mean, how do you think that it's possible? How can that be undone? I mean, we're seeing workers' rights, all these hard-fought rights that
Oh, Tara, do you want to go ahead? I think
can
we've
jump in.
lost
Yeah.
Fatir. Please do.
I think we may have lost or temporarily lost sound on that, but yes, I mean, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for workers to get taken advantage of. And I think there's been a lot in the media recently that, we know that the workers are extremely vulnerable, and factories are vulnerable to take condition to agree to conditions with brands that don't allow them to ensure proper working conditions for the workers. And so it's we all need to, that's why it's so important to come together as an industry and for the brands to take their responsibility as well as the employers and the workers, so that this doesn't become a race to the bottom, and that those at the lowest end of power and privilege aren't the ones who suffer the greatest. So that's where the responsibility comes for all of us who are involved in this work to ensure that it's a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom.
Okay, Sam, your hand is still up. Did you want to ask another question?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Okay.
Apologies.
Okay. If there are any other questions, now is the time. Okay. If not, well then, thank you to everybody for taking part. Just to remind everyone that the embargo ends at 4 p.m. So that's in 20 minutes from now. If you need any follow-up information or you want to carry out any interviews, please contact newsroom@ilo.org. That's newsroom, one word, @ilo.org, or any of the other ILO contacts that you may already have. A recording of this briefing will also be available online shortly, and we can share the link with you, or let us know if you require that. Otherwise, let me thank you again for taking part. It's been great to be here with you, and I hope that we can all meet up again online at some point soon. Thank you very much.